that Black households had $5,677 in wealth, which would be assets minus debts, while the average Latino household had $6,325. But the average white household had $113,149 in wealth. So about 1/3 of all Black and Latino households had zero or negative net worth in 2009 alone. So particularly from a social work perspective and from a human perspective, that's unacceptable. We're looking at such a drastic wealth gap and income inequality, and it's really unfortunate, and we're going to see that continue. Once you started off making a lower salary, you've started off with less debt, or less wealth, it's going to be more difficult to get to higher points in your life where you can accumulate that wealth. So from a social work perspective, we have a lot to do. The good news is that we'll never be out of a job, but the bad news is that we're dealing with some of the most significant issues that many of us have ever seen in our lifetimes. But the good news, what have we done in the past to be leaders within the profession? This list is by no means comprehensive, so this is just a little taste of what social workers have done to improve, particularly on a federal landscape. But civil rights issues, many of you have probably heard that the Martin Luther King Memorial is being officially opened on Sunday. Hopefully the storms stay away from that. But social workers had a significant role in civil rights and in women's rights during the different movements. Unemployment insurance, disability pay, Social Security, which I'll talk about in a minute, humane treatment for people with mental illness, developmental disabilities, and substance abuse. All of these things, fair pay. I mean, any movement that is around today, any regulation or law or anything that came about looking really at equality and social justice had a social worker involved in it. So we have a lot of knowledge and experience to draw from, particularly today when we're crafting public policy. So a few of my favorite social workers that I like to talk about that are certainly role models of mine. One is Frances Perkins. She was the first female Secretary of Labor. She worked under President FDR. She was with him his entire 3 terms before the term limits came about. So she was Secretary of Labor from 33 to 45. She had a unique understanding of politics, and they called her the master deal maker, and I always laugh that people act like she had this incredible skill set to talk to anyone and make deals and move and get people to understand, but she was just a social worker. I mean, that's what we all do in our daily lives. In our work, we help to negotiate difficult situations, we help to work with different kinds of people, and she was often the only woman in a room full of men, typically white men, and she really helped them to come around and see why we needed things like Social Security, why we needed fair wage, and why we needed to look at labor issues a little more carefully. She was a key architect of the New Deal legislation and worked on what eventually became the Social Security Act of 1935. So big shoes to fill, and this book is excellent. It came out last year if you're interested in learning more about her. Harry Hawkins, another social work leader who worked with FDR, they were good friends. Hopkins supervised the Federal Emergency Relief Association, the Civil Works Administration, and the Works Progress Administration. So many of the roads and bridges and civil projects that you see today, Harry Hopkins had a huge role in playing that. He also was a close advisor to Eleanor Roosevelt and even lived at the White House at some point in time. One of my favorite Hopkins quotes, which everyone loves this, he said, when someone told Hopkins things would work out for the unemployed in the long run, he responded, people don't eat in the long run, they eat every day. Hunger is not debatable. And I think that we're looking at this quote in context of the Great Depression, but 1 in 8 people struggle with hunger in America alone. So we're still dealing with something that it's a real issue. Social workers, as Jennifer was talking about, burnout. You're seeing people who can't eat, who don't wake up, they go to bed hungry and they don't have enough food to put on the table for their families. So you're looking at really, really serious issues that on my way home every day, I drive by a homeless shelter and I see the line keep growing and growing for dinner every night, that they're coming to get food in the evening, and every day I go by, the line gets longer. And you can, the social work in me, my heart breaks because there's just not enough to go around, or, it's not distributed equally. So it's unfortunate, but this is a quote that I still think about a lot today. And one of my favorite social workers, he's from Kentucky, so I'm a little biased here, but Whitney Young, he was one of the first, he was a huge member of the Civil Rights Movement. You may have not heard of him before, but he was working right alongside Martin Luther King and the other big leaders in the Civil Rights Movement. He has a master's in social work. He went to war. He was a soldier in the war, and he said Social work appeared to offer the best opportunities to do on a grander scale what he had accomplished during the war in getting better treatment for black soldiers in a Jim Crow army. The choice seemed clear. As a social worker, he could address the societal ills that afflicted blacks in post-World War II America. And again, this was a story of someone who was working with black soldiers and their white male bosses, and he was able to bring them together and say, look, this isn't going to work. It behooves our country to work together in a really positive way, to get along, to figure out what to do. So again, social work skills. The things that they teach us in class, the things that we do on a daily basis that I think everyone acts like they're these newfangled skills that nobody knows how to use. But he was also executive director of the Urban League, and he brought the organization to the forefront of the civil rights movement. He advised many presidents, Presidents Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, and he died when he was president of NASW. He was president of our national office. He drowned in Nigeria. And our vice president at the time said that he was a bridge builder. His loss is inestimable, and I personally think he is irreplaceable. We literally have no one to take his place. And President Nixon said Young was a doer, not a talker, and Nixon was someone who was constantly on Whitney Young's list of people to bash and say, you're not doing the right thing, you're not helping people get out of poverty, you're not working hard enough on these issues. So then Nixon came back and said, despite our differences, he was a man who got things done. He didn't sit around and talk about it. And as you'll note in a minute, we named the Social Work Reinvestment Act after Whitney Young and Dr. Dorothy Height. I had the wonderful experience of meeting Dr. Height before she died last year. She was the most incredible person I've ever met in real life. She was 98, I believe, when she died. And I would go to the office of the National Council of Negro Women because she was the biggest fan of the legislation that we've had. She talked to us one day, and we said, how are you doing? We're working on the bill. We're trying to get more co-sponsors. And she said, I went to the White House today, and I told that Obama he better get this bill passed. So she was a good person to have on her team. Every time I would go to her office to talk to her, she would be typing away on her computer. So whenever I talk to my colleagues who are not so computer savvy and they aren't interested in it, I'm like, no. She was in her 90s. She was using her computer. That's not an excuse. But she was president emerita of the National Council of Negro Women. She started her social work career as a caseworker for the New York City Welfare Department, and she served as president of NCNW since 1957. She was the only woman who was really in the big seven of the civil rights movement, so along with Whitney Young and Martin Luther King and John Lewis and all of the big names in the civil rights movement. She was the woman at the table, and she often talked about how difficult that would be, that a lot of times she had to overlook the fact that she was also a woman and she had struggles of her own in order to move the civil rights movement forward. So she's just really a fascinating person, an amazing social worker. She was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the Congressional Gold Medal, and NASW actually was just about to give her our Lifetime Achievement Award at the Social Work Congress last year, and she died a few days before. So in our office now we have this beautiful award of a woman holding up the world, because that's really, really what she was. So it was a huge loss when she died. So before I get into